Central Park is a very picturesque. It's one of Pasadena's oldest parks. It has a very long history in terms of being a transit port and depot going way back into the 1900s. But now with the rail station that is just adjacent to it, as well as some other community services that are adjacent to it, we see an intersection between two different communities, but yet, we still want to understand how we can kind of bridge some of these gaps, understand what the issues are within these communities, how law enforcement plays a role within these communities. For disclosure purposes, we have invited members of Pasadena Police Department to listen and observe this evening, to just take some notes. And then we'd like to reconvene with them at a later date and discuss some of the things that we've learned throughout this 4-week series. Excuse me. So just the way that this is going to flow this evening, we have some guests here, which I'll introduce in just a second, but we'll spend some time in conversation with Ben Adam Claimer. And Ben is a consultant with Cahoots, and I'll let him tell you a little bit more about his organization, as well as Sean Morrissey, who just recently got promoted to, I believe, Senior Director at Union Station Homeless Services. And both of them bring interesting perspectives in terms of being in the field, working directly with impacted communities. And we'll unpack and kind of understand some of their things that they experience. Later in this evening, we have reserved plenty of time for the audience to ask questions. There's 2 ways that you'll be able to do that. You can enter a question into the chat, and we'll get that question into our panel and for discussion. Or you can raise your hand, and if you'd like to ask the questions online. Of course, we're adults here. Some of us may not show up that way, but I do ask that you be respectful to other people's opinions. We don't necessarily have to agree. We welcome discourse. We're not all supposed to think about the issues the exact same, but I do ask that you respect those who are sharing. And then if you learned something today, feel free to take it outside of this Zoom environment and share with someone else. So let's go ahead and get started. I first want to thank Brandon Lamar, who's here with us. And Brandon is helping us facilitate and monitor the chat room. My first guest, as I mentioned earlier, is Ben Adam Claimer, and he's with Cahoots as well as Sean Morrissey. Ben, I want to start with you because first, let's get an overview of what Cahoots is and how that intersection of populations and police and the unhoused and housing insecure communities.
Yeah. So just for everyone to know, if you hear the dulcet sounds of 2 young boys, wrestling in the background, that's my kids. So they are 6 and 4 and full of energy because they were at their grandmother's house all day watching, movies and stuff. So I'm Ben Adam Claimer. I'm a resident of Pasadena. I also used to work here as a case manager. My first job as a case manager was working with a group called Housing Works. My very first client that I ever had as a case manager working with Housing Works, which is where I met Sean, was a man who was a longtime Central Park connoisseur and spent his time there rather often. And I used to pick him up there rather often. So I've got a lot of experience being there and meeting folks there. And after I did that work with Housing Works and in Pasadena, I went up to Oregon and I worked for the Cahoots team in Eugene and Springfield, which at the time was this sort of relatively obscure kind of crisis assistance team, and that has now been sort of catalyzed into the national spotlight as people have begun to reimagine what it's like to send someone out to provide assistance to community members who are experiencing mental health, substance use, or homelessness related crises. I'm now working as a consultant with Crisis Consulting, which is a group that I created to help cities develop mobile crisis teams in the vein of the Cahoots team. And so we're trying to do that, get that going here in California, and hopefully one day maybe in Pasadena too. So Cahoots and the Cahoots model is a form of mobile crisis response that is unique to Eugene and Springfield, or at least it started there in Oregon. Now there's some other cities that have duplicated the model. And what it is it's a way to alleviate the police department and the fire department and EMS from having to respond to the kinds of calls that really overburden those types of responses, mainly mental health, substance use, and homelessness related crises. So anytime somebody's having some kind of a crisis and it's related to those types of issues, we often send police and fire to those types of to fire and EMS to those types of calls. And it can be very difficult for them. They're often not trained to handle those types of things, or they didn't, a lot of times they didn't really get into the work to sort of manage those types of things. And so they can be very frustrating. They can be very long calls. They can be very difficult with family members and suicidal teenagers and a whole slew of different types of folks. And so Cahoots model is oriented around having a crisis counselor and an EMT paired up to go out to these types of calls. And what makes our model particularly unique is that in the same way that you get the police or you get the fire department or the ambulance, which is to say you call 911 or you call the non-emergency number and you request assistance from the first responders in your city, that's how you get Cahoots. It's the same way. You can just call and say, hey, my son or daughter or me, myself, or my friend is having a mental health issue. They're feeling suicidal. They're feeling overwhelmed. There's somebody sleeping on the street, and I'm worried that they don't have enough clothes tonight, and it's cold. And I don't know who to call. I don't know how to get assistance for that. Can you send someone, please, to help this person? And instead of sending the police department or the fire department, they send Cahoots.
Okay.
And so when thinking about this in terms of Central Park, I think right away you can begin to sort of grasp what the meaning that would be for a lot of the folks that are down there. It's a busy place, a lot of people, walking around because of Old Town right there, and and a lot of calls end up there. So a team like Cahoots being able to respond to those types of things would go a long way to change how the city responds to those types of issues.
Okay. And I want to get more, in detail in terms of what it actually is on the ground and what you believe are some of the benefits of a program like this, and maybe what are some of the trappings or negative aspects of it. So, but let's get Sean into the conversation. Sean, give us a little bit more about your background and what you do over at Union Homeless Services. Union Station Homeless Services.
Yeah. Thank you, James. Honored to be here. Thanks for having me. My name is Sean Morsey. I am the senior director. I did just get a promotion, which is pretty great. And Union Station Homeless Services is a homeless service provider. They've been around for almost 50 years here in Pasadena. It started as a program out of All Saints, which was basically kind of a soup kitchen on Union Street, where it got its name. And over the course of the decades, it has morphed into kind of one of the premier homeless service agencies. It definitely at the forefront of best practices in the San Gabriel Valley. We've learned a lot about what causes homelessness and what moves folks from homelessness into housing, which interestingly enough was not a part of homeless services for many, many years. Housing was never offered really as a part of homeless services, which is odd because, at the end of the day, I always say it took us, almost 50 years to figure out that the solution to homelessness was an actual home. But in the past, 15 years or so, we've actually now included that that's the end goal. And we address just about every aspect of homelessness. We work with anyone who's experiencing homelessness, from youth to families to individuals, folks who are chronically homeless with very complex challenges, um, on down to folks who just need to get in somewhere temporarily so they can get a job and get back on their feet and be able to afford rent. Um, and so we basically we cover it all at Union Station. I will say, um, or I don't know if you want me to end it there, and then we can
Well, I
continue.
wanted to, because I want to bring you and Ben kind of back
Yeah.
and kind of bridge it together, because we're currently in a pandemic. Um, Mental health conditions are increasing within our population. Homelessness obviously is increasing, or housing insecure, depending upon how you want to look at it. Um, that tends to I tend to think that that's going to result in more of the population having contact with law enforcement, with kind of all of these other societal issues that are in. But for some, and I know this may be kind of a simple question, some people think people don't want to be housed, or lazy. I mean, and I really want to humanize the
Yeah.
conversation, so that when people understand, when they're interacting with people, that they're people also.
Yeah. Yeah, let me say this about that, and this is another thing I always say, is that in the almost 18 years that I've been doing this work, and I've met and worked with hundreds and thousands of homeless folks, I have yet to meet one person who did not want to be inside in their own apartment, have their own bathroom, their own bedroom, their own kitchen. The idea that people are choosing this as a lifestyle is a myth. Traditionally, I think what has been offered folks who are experiencing homelessness are not actual homes. They've been programs, uh, shelters, things like that, and people choose not to stay. I mean, I don't want to stay in a spot like that. So people choose not to enter into maybe chaotic atmospheres or environments, or places where they are mandated to do certain things that the rest of us don't have to do to maintain our homes. And one thing I learned along the way, I will share this, that I spent almost 30 years as an IV drug user, and then later became homeless. I currently live in Northwest Pasadena, and I washed up here in 2002. Someone kicked me out of their car in front of the shelter, which is just down the street from Central Park, and said, go get some help. And I did, and that represented the first time that I actually began to get okay. I was almost 40 years old at that point. And what I began to learn working in this sector, that I didn't even know was partly my own experience, was that homelessness is not a choice. People don't just decide to become homeless. And the fact that we have tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands of folks who are experiencing homelessness, that is a result of broken systems. It's a result of barrier-ridden systems that have so many impediments that we've set up a lot of systems that are supposed to catch people when they're having issues before it results in homelessness. And those systems they were broken then, and they're broken now. It was a confluence of events and failed systems about 50 years ago that led kind of to the numbers that we're seeing on the street today. A whole bunch of bad policies, budget restrictions, bad laws, and broken systems that are largely still broken today. I'll just give you a couple really quick examples of that. If someone, we often say that the resources are out there. If people really wanted the help, they would just go get it. As a skilled caseworker who knows how to navigate all of these systems, it can take me up to 3 months to get somebody in front of a psychiatrist who wants to take medication. And that means they have to jump through a whole bunch of hoops. In the meantime, they have to be compliant with a whole bunch of rules and be living on the street while they're doing that. So it can take about 3 months to get in front of a psychiatrist to get medication. If someone wants to avail themselves of, drug and alcohol treatment, traditionally it was probably 6 weeks, 2 months to get a detox bed, and maybe 4 to 6 months to get a treatment bed after detox. It hasn't changed that much in 2021. These are challenging systems to navigate. And when I reflected on my own homelessness, before I landed at Union Station, I remember that I spent almost a year trying to get into drug and alcohol treatment. And it was so challenging, especially as a homeless man who didn't have a cell phone, because you had to call every day to keep your name on the list. And if you failed, you went back to the start of the line. And once you got there, you actually had to prove to them that you were there because you wanted to be, not because you were homeless and you needed a place to stay or get inside, but you had to prove to them continuously that you were there for all of the right reasons, as opposed to just because you really needed the help. One of my favorite quotes is from a doctor named Gabor Mate, and he says this, that addiction is a response to pain. We need to stop asking why so much addiction, and we need to start asking why so much pain. And homelessness, I think, is exactly like that. These are pain responses to systems that are failing people upstream, that are supposed to catch them before they fall into homelessness, that are just not doing that. And because those supports aren't there, people fall into homelessness. And it's really challenging to get out of it once you do.
So when people, and again, we're talking about Central Park, right? Because I frequent the park. It's a cool place. Hop on the train with my son, and you can have that outing and experience, and you go play. And it's just people in the park. Um, but what is it that people may not know? You have folks at the playground with their kids, and then you have another group of people kind of to the south end of the street. What is it that people that are at the playground don't know about those folks who are uh, kind of on the south end of the park?
Yeah. I think the basic thing that we forget about folks is we've mistaken the people who are experiencing the problem as the ones who created the problem, which is not true. And I think what I know about some of the best people I know are those who are experiencing homelessness. And what I think that we forget as a society, because we have a long history in this country of othering people, right? People who look different from us, people who act different from us, whether it's skin color or the way we dress or present ourselves. And I think that that's happened with homelessness. And I think what we as a society have forgotten is that these are human beings who have the exact same longings, dreams, hopes, wants, desires as the rest of us. None of them are choosing to be out there, but there really is not housing for folks, and that they are chest deep in the middle of their own traumatic experience. And so imagine, how hard it's been this past year for those of us who live inside just to deal with COVID, right? The isolation that happens as a result of COVID, all of the different things that we have to do, the disconnection from our communities, our support networks. Imagine this past year having to sleep in dirt or in bushes and deal with all of that. And that you've been doing that sometimes for years and years. That's an absolute trauma and shock to the system, not only the body, but the psyche. And so you're dealing with a lot of folks who are in the middle of a traumatic experience and expecting them to just kind of, get their shit together, pull it together, and do all the things you're supposed to do. And, human beings, human bodies just do not work that way. We don't function that way. Some of us barely function that way in housing. It's been a tough year for me. I can't imagine how I would have dealt with this on the street in these past few months.
Some in the public would say that these are drug addicts, alcoholics, junkies, just the throwaway of society. How does the substance abuse play a part in that community and also like the war on drugs? Has that kind of stacked on?
Absolutely. There is a huge intersection between those things. Again, substance use is a pain response, right? It's a symptom of something else that's happening. It's a public health issue. It's not a criminal issue. And when we talk about the war on drugs, if you really want to go back to the history of drug control, going back 100 years, it wasn't as if there was an FDA running around saying, you know, marijuana is bad for you, alcohol is okay, cocaine is bad, opium is bad, tobacco is okay. Basically, the history of drug control and drug prohibition relates to the color of the skin of the people who were using those substances. That's how we got the laws that we're working under today, and we've created those laws and a whole war on drugs around that, where we spent over $1 trillion. And in the 45 or 50 years that we've been in the middle of the war on drugs, we've spent $1 trillion. We have more drug users, more drugs, better drugs than ever before. And we've also created a mass incarceration system where we funnel people into that industrial complex that makes a whole bunch of money. And those happen to be mostly people of color. You know, in the United States, we have 5% of the world's population, but we incarcerate 25% of the world's incarcerated population. Most of those are people of color. So the war on drugs is a war on people, really, especially people of color. And it also incentivizes drug arrests. You know, there's something called the Byrne Grant. There's asset forfeiture and seizure that law enforcement agencies are able to use those assets to partially buy, new vehicles and equipment and things like that. And this is not the fault of police departments. This is, federal government funding that incentivizes drug arrests in the form of overtime. The more arrests you make, the more time you have to spend at your desk writing reports, and the more time you do that, the more overtime. There are hundreds and hundreds of thousands of dollars spent on overtime writing reports for drug arrests. Over 50% of the people who are incarcerated today are incarcerated for minor drug arrests. So this whole thing has become big business, and it's also a driver into homelessness and a perpetuator of homelessness. I'll say this and I'll shut up, that the criminalization of drugs has done more to break up communities, marginalize people, harm families, and it's caused more death than the drugs themselves ever could. We know that alcohol and tobacco kill more people per capita per year than any of the illicit drugs, but those are the ones that are not only legal, but are highly celebrated. We create places where people can go, pay money, and ingest as much of those as they want. We celebrate it. We spend tons of money selling it. So we need to start looking at drug policy in America and the way that we police, because drug policy attaches a dollar figure to the head of any potential person walking down the street. And that changes, I think, the way, or informs the way communities are policed.
Okay. I want to bring Ben back into
Yeah.
to the conversation, and really kind of going back into cahoots. We understand, I think, the population, that some of the population that may be in Central Park. So why is a program like Cahoots a better option than sending uniformed officers, with a full tool belt, a full cadre of, things that can escalate into deadly force? Why is the Cahoots model a better solution for Pasadena?
Yeah. Oh, yeah. And I just first want to echo and just say thank you to Sean for that phenomenal overview. I haven't been on a panel with Sean in quite some time, so this is fun. And one thing I want to bring up too is, talking about the whole systemic stuff, and then I will get to that. I promise you, I'll get to that point that you just asked. But we kind of think of the war on drugs starting with Nixon and then really being escalated by Reagan. One of the other major data points in that is the housing and urban development budget during that time. So when Jimmy Carter was president in 1978, the HUD budget was $78 billion. By the time it went, $87 billion. By the time it got to Reagan in 1982, it had dropped down to $18 billion. They had cut nearly $70 billion from that budget. We are now, the PUD budget this year was 44. So we are not even close to what it was before that time. That was one of the most major causes of homelessness, was the slashing of that budget, which then turned around, there was a, because it put people out on the street. It just literally put them on the street because they no longer had the ability to pay for housing. And so what you get is you get this mass population that has just grown and grown and grown. And what we do at Cahoots is just a very small, or the Cahoots model just approaches a very small slice of that. And because, ultimately, like Sean said, the solution to homelessness is homes. What the Cahoots model does is it creates a form of response to that a form of response to people living on the street that comes and meets them where they are. It treats them as though they are not a threat to them, because it's not coming with the aspect that force will be involved, because there's no force involved in the Cahoots model. We don't touch people. We don't do any of that kind of stuff. And we approach them with this sort of the very simple perspective, which is, you are struggling and we are here to support you in order to figure out how you can utilize the resources within yourself and the resources within your community to manage the crisis that you're currently having.
Isn't that dangerous though? I mean,
yeah.
I
So yeah, that's a great question. So many people are so concerned about our welfare and our well-being on these calls. I've been on over 10,000 Cahoots calls, and I can tell you right now that the idea that folks are who are having mental health issues or experiencing homelessness are a threat or a danger to me, it's a stigmatizing. It's one of those things that we as a society are working really hard to end, which is to say, we should treat folks as though they are as though not so much that they're a threat to us, but maybe when they're living on the street, we might be more of a threat to them. It's violence against people living on the street is frequent and common, and it just does not it doesn't get treated or handled very well, because they just don't get taken very seriously. No Cahoots worker.
On the
Yeah,
other side, I know you're not an officer, so you can't
Sure.
speak for officers. You can only speak from your experience in the field. But what's the difference when a uniformed officer may encounter that person, and then what escalates from there?
Yeah, and it's typical. There are different types of people who work in police departments. Some of them can be aggressive and not do a great job of meeting people where they're at. Some of them do a fine job meeting them where they're at. However, they all still work for a system that sort of dictates varying norms and practices when dealing with these types of issues. And so very frequently, police officers, in my experience, and I've worked alongside a lot of police officers, when they show up to calls, they're looking to figure out a way to manage whatever the issue is. They want to find some kind of solution to it. And they have a range of things that they can do to sort of solve an issue or address an issue. And typically that is something, when we're talking about homelessness, that's usually either leave it alone because really it's nothing, write a citation because there's some kind of trespass going on, or do an arrest because the person is not complying with the trespassing issue, or they're being erratic and therefore it's like a threat. So then what ends up happening there is, if they're cited, they obviously are probably never going to be able to pay off that citation. That gets them into the court system, which then will cause a warrant to be put out for them. If they don't pay that citation, they don't show up to court. Once they have that warrant, then if a police officer shows up and meets with them, and the police officer asks their dispatch, is there a warrant for this person out? The dispatch will say yes. When that happens, then the police officer is mandated to arrest them. So then when that happens, then that person is now in jail, and on and on. And so that's how kind of you get trapped in that sort of legal, glass rotating door. When you send out a non-law enforcement response to that, which we try to, which is what the Cahoots model does, then the option for that just doesn't happen, at least not as often. I'm not saying that in Eugene and Springfield that doesn't happen, because of course it still does. They still have a police department, and they still operate on that way. And we work with the police department very closely. They do our dispatch, and we provide a lot of service to them. And the officers there really like us, because remember what I said, that there were 3 options: leave it alone, write a citation, or take them to jail. What the police officers have in Eugene and Springfield, they have a 4th option called Cahoots. Get them down here and let them handle it. Let them take this person to the sobering center. Let them take this person to the shelter. Let them take this person to the hospital or the urgent care. And so what we provide is that extra tool for the police officers, so that they feel like they have more power to actually deal with that situation.
Okay. Well, I want to, wrap up this portion of, because I see questions are coming in and comments are coming in. So we want to make sure that we open it up to the audience to have an opportunity to participate. You believe this is a better solution? I don't know about if it's the best solution, but you believe, Ben, that this is a better solution for Pasadena?
Oh yes. I think Pasadena would, I think this model would thrive here. I think it would just be a phenomenal way to respond. And not just for people living on the street, but especially for people living on the street. The city of Pasadena is actually very similar in size to the city of Eugene. And so when we're thinking about it, what it could look like, there's a lot of crossover there. City of Pasadena is also, LA County is such a bizarre place, because you have cities like Beverly Hills, right, where just every single person is like super rich, and then you have cities where there's other cities, like Southgate, where everyone is just struggling to get by. Pasadena is one of those cities that's more like Eugene, where there are people who are very impoverished living here, and people who are very, very wealthy. And so it's a place where you have that kind of a mixed income world, with a lot of people living on the street. Not as many in Pasadena as there are in Eugene. There's quite a lot more people living on the street in Eugene than there are in Pasadena. But with a similar size population and that kind of mixed income. And so a team like a Kahoot style mobile crisis team here, I think would thrive very well. There's a lot of need and would do a lot of good for the community.
And typically, who pays for Cahoots?
So the city of Eugene pays for Cahoots in Eugene, and then the county of Lane County and the city of Springfield pay for it in the city of Springfield. And for folks that don't really know, like, Springfield is basically what Springfield is the city right next to Eugene. It's sort of like almost like Arcadia is, there's.
I guess my question is that out of and this may be too deep, but is that out of the city's general fund, or does that come out of the police
general fund?
General.
Well, so here's a little bit of history on Cahoots. So back in 1988 or 87, really, actually, the city was considering hiring more police officers in the city of Eugene, and because they had a very low police officer to citizen ratio.
Mhm.
And so they said, we're going to hire more police officers unless somebody has a different idea. And the executive director of the Whitebird Clinic, which runs the Cahoots program, said, we have this 24-hour crisis line where people call us up on the phone, and we do crisis intervention with them over the phone. we think it'd be really cool to, sometimes people, we want to go talk to them or we want them to come to us, but they can't get to us. We think it'd be really cool to be able to take the crisis team in the office and move them out onto the streets. And so that's how you get crisis assistance helping out on the streets. The Whitebird Clinic was at the time, and is somewhat still to this day, run by a bunch of hippies. And so they thought it was the funniest thing ever that they called their team that was working with the police cahoots, because now they're in cahoots with the cops. And so they proposed that to the city, and the city said, well, that sounds cool. And so then that's what they did. And for a while, I mean, for a long time, it was just kind of a thing that those weirdos up in Eugene did. And now now people are looking at that then and going, huh, that's pretty sweet. Maybe we could get that in our town too.
I think where I'm going with this, and I'm gonna wrap it up because we want to bring Brandon in, and so he can bring some of these questions in. There's a lot of, the elephant in this conversation right now is what we heard most of last year: defund the police. And I see this more as a repurposing of resources to support services for a very vulnerable population. Yeah, I've just gotten a text from Flo. I'm over time, so we want to make sure that we keep moving. Sean, thank you so much for talking with me. I got so many more questions that I could ask you guys individually, and would love to continue the dialogue. Let's bring Brandon in, Brandon Lamar, who is a board member with POP, and Brandon's also facilitating and going through the chat. Brandon, we have questions in the chat.
Hello, everyone. So yeah, I have one question from Cindy, and it's actually 3 questions in one. And so the first question is, what department in the city could decide to hire cahoots or Ben's new company? The second question is, do police departments hire them, health departments, or the city manager? And then the last question is there dialogue happening in Pasadena right now about cahoots?
Well, so what I do is I help cities sort of develop these programs, write the RFP, pick the nonprofit that's going to run it. If you decide to go that way, most of the cities, that's what they want to do. And then train the teams once they get hired, and get on the ground. So in terms of who hires them, all of those organizations are involved. Whether that's health department, city manager, absolutely. City managers sort of, who have a lot of control over budgets and where that money goes. They're very much involved. Police department, fire department, EMS, they're all involved in this. And then you have to sort of figure out how it's going to get funded. I am solely dedicated to getting mobile crisis teams off the ground. Any city that wants to do that, however they want to fund it, that's sort of their prerogative. If they decide that they're going to cut police funding and fund mobile crisis, okay. If they decide they're going to, garner funds from somewhere else and they're going to fund mobile crisis, okay, I'll work with anyone to get it going. But I just believe in the model. I believe in the concept. And so, yeah, it's really just depends on who wants to do it. Even in Oregon with the Cahoots team, there's different ways, right? So in Eugene, the city pays, the police own the contract, and then the money goes to city to police to Cahoots. In Springfield, on the other side of the river, the other side of the freeway, really, the county pays and the city pays, and it doesn't go through the police, it just goes straight to Cahoots. So it really just depends.
And then just real quick, everyone, if you guys have questions and you don't want to come on, you can just write them in the chat. And then if you also have questions and you don't mind coming on and answering your own questions, just type question in the chat and I'll bring you in or let you know when you can come in, just so we can make sure that this is very organized. All right. Ben, last question that was a part of that is there any conversation happening right now with Pasadena?
So I have spoken with the police chief. I have spoken with fire and the city manager, Stephen Ramel. There has been interest along the city council, and I was invited to do a presentation for the public safety committee. Unfortunately, that That ended up getting canceled because there wasn't a quorum for it, or I don't know. I wasn't really super clear on what that was. But there are a lot of people interested in it, and there's a lot of there's a lot of sort of talk going on, and also the San Gabriel Valley Council of Governments is doing a study to see what it would look like to try to do this sort of San Gabriel Valley wide. So that may also play a part into what kind of decisions get made about it.
Ooh. Next question. I'm a city planner. From the city planner's perspective and from someone who has a homeless family member, I want to know what is the unsheltered needs as it relates to their community and the built environment. I know from experience that housing will need to be all inclusive. City of LA has started to implement a version of this. What else is needed? And I believe this is for Ben and Sean.
I'll take a stab at that. Maybe I could just get clarification on what the LA City implementation version is, and that would help me perhaps.
Yeah, right now, City of
Go ahead.
LA has put together some housing forms where they have temporary housing with nurses on staff, and they adhere to certain shots and certain needs that they need in terms of medication.
Got it. Okay. Yeah. Thank you. Yeah. So I think, it runs the gamut because every individual experiencing homelessness is an individual. So, what, James might need is different from what I might need. So I think there's this recognition that there's no cookie cutter answer to any of this, that we have to have an array of housing options and models that are used. And I'll tell you that, up until around 2005, 2010, if you were homeless, you had to go to the homeless service provider. They would hand you a list of things that you had to go get done. And if you couldn't accomplish those, you couldn't move through the system or get any further. And that left out a whole bunch of people. It served the folks who were the highest functioning, who could jump through all the hoops, and the people who couldn't were left out on the street. And those are the ones who have been out there for, decades sometimes. So there was a recognition that we had to holistically treat people. Instead of placing people into service systems, we needed to build service systems around the individual. We needed to bend to meet the needs of the human being, as opposed to making the human being bend to meet the requirements of systems, many of which are broken and barrier ridden. So this is perhaps a very long answer to your question, but everything that we do in homeless services now is with that in mind, the individual, all the way down to what type of housing works best for that person. Some people do better and want to live in a congregate setting. Other models have people renting, individual apartments in a community. And I think that the one common thread through all of this, no matter what it looks like, no matter what the housing solution looks like, is along the way, you need to provide intensive support services. Some of those which stay with people permanently. We have this one model is permanent supportive housing. So the housing is permanent. The support services that come with it are permanent too. Those are for folks who are really challenging and complex. Other people might need a limited amount of that, but all of it is highly relational, and a lot of authentic relationships, authentic community, helping people integrate into a natural way and trying to normalize the housing experience, right? So it doesn't look institutional and it doesn't look like a program. It looks exactly like what my housing is, and offering people choices and building services, support services that have high value for people and are attractive and things that they want to be a part of. And I think that what we found, and that's essentially the housing first model that I've just described. And what we found is when you do that, people begin to get better, and it starts with having four walls and a roof over your head. But what's really needed to make people thrive, and this is even people with serious mental health issues, people with, intense drug and alcohol issues, people begin to get better when they become part of a community, when they're offered non-judgment, love, nurture, when they're given purpose, when they're given a place to be in the world. And we know that like love, authentic relationships and community is what's healing for all of us in our daily lives. That's what's made, I think, COVID so hard for people, because it separated us from a lot of that. And that's what folks who are living outside lack. And that's what these models intend to do and give people. And when that happens, man, miracles happen. We have a 97% success rate for people who are chronic and vulnerably homeless with some of the worst conditions that you see on the street, going into housing, receiving these kinds of models, and just thriving. It's the most amazing thing I've ever seen.
Thank you, Sean. One question before I go to Pam's question. For Ben, what is the cost rate for bringing, or the budget rate for bringing Cahoots to a city or a town?
Yeah, so by my estimation, a Kahoot-style mobile crisis team in a urban area of Southern California would cost, if you wanted to fund it really, really nice and make it really well done, a 24-hour van, which is one van that's on for 24 hours a day, 365 days a year, would cost about $1.5 million. And then which for the amount of hours that you're getting out of that, and the time that you're spending is quite a bit cheaper than police department or the fire department. And then you can that's top notch. You can run it for a bit cheaper, probably around 1.2 if you just pay folks a little bit less, or there's some cost savings here and there that you can implement. Although to really fund it nicely, I think that's what you would need. Is
that 1.2 to 1.5 per van? Is that just for one van?
Per 24-hour unit. So that's a 24-hour unit, 365 days a year. So then, which is approximately 10 to 11 employees. And so, and you got to pay for a whole slew of different things, to get there. But then, my recommendation generally is that you have about one 24-hour unit for every 100,000 people minimum. So a city like Pasadena, you would probably do really well with a 24-hour unit, and then maybe like a 12-hour, sort of peak hours overlap unit. That would be about the right ratio.
Great, thank you for that.
Hey, Brandon, let me jump in
Go
real
ahead.
quick here, because currently the police department has a HOPE team, and the HOPE team operates from 8 a.m. until 10 p.m. And so there isn't that 24-hour coverage from a specialized team to deal with it. And that's just something that has perplexed me. I mean, we obviously know things happen after 10 p.m. and certainly before 8 a.m. And so one of the things that I think we should take away from this discussion, I would be curious to know how much the annual budget is for our HOPE team, and hours and whatnot, because I think if Ben is saying 1.2, 1.5, our city seems to find that type of resource for some of the most interesting projects. Let's just put it that way. But this doesn't seem like a huge line item. And so I'll let you go ahead and go with the rest of the questions, Brandon.
That's a great question too, James, or statement. Next question from Pam is, are there laws or liability issues that make it difficult for cities to start a Cahoots program?
I personally don't think that there really are. And there are a number of cities now all around California that are implementing this. And quite frankly, we haven't been running into issues. We have Cahoots has a medical director who supervises the EMTs, and they practice under his license. So any EMT has to practice under a medical doctor's license. So I mean, that's the way it is. And then we pay for a liability and professional insurance for the team. The same way that any homeless service agency or or housing agency or any social service agency at all. They have to pay for all that kind of stuff the same way that Cahoots does. So we haven't found that there's any increased liability. We haven't found that there's any kind of barriers necessarily to implementing these types of programs. And we've now, they've duplicated it in Denver, Olympia, Washington. The Oakland team is getting started soon, and in San Francisco as well. And then we're working on getting it started in Petaluma, California, Santa Rosa, California, Huntington Beach, California.
Great, thank you. David Chavez asked, and I believe this is for both, whoever wants to answer, capacity to eliminate the police neighborhood section and use those funds to support homeless folks. Also, how do we get the city to build housing like Echo Hood, which is being done in LA and led by LA Can and houseless folks themselves? So let's break it down. Let's go to the first question. Capacity to eliminate the Pasadena neighborhood section and use those funds to support homeless folks.
I mean, I
guess that's just for your opinion.
Yeah, I don't know personally about the inner workings of the Pasadena Police Department or anything like that, And like I said before, if the city wanted to do something like that and support creating a mobile crisis team or support housing or something like that, that's sort of their prerogative.
Absolutely. And then the second question, and I'm not sure if you guys would have an answer for this, but how do we get the city to build housing like Echo Hood, which is being done in Los Angeles and led by LA Can, which is houseless folks themselves?
Yeah, I'll try to answer that. I'm not familiar with those two projects, Echo Hood and Vignes Street. I can say that we do have in Pasadena, I want to say 3 or 4 permanent supportive housing buildings, which are for families and for individuals that use I'm familiar with LA Can and their good work, and use those models, use the best practice models to help folks stabilize, become part of the community, and thrive. I think that also, what we've done in Pasadena, if you go to 2010, when we first implemented these Housing First initiatives in Pasadena, we had over 1,200 folks homeless on the street. Because of these best practices, last year's number, I believe, was 527. That's with folks newly falling into homelessness. We have cut our numbers in over half and had reductions in homelessness where other cities and within the county are having large increases in homelessness. So I know that, like the work that LA Can is doing, we're on the cutting edge of services and the recognition that housing and very specific types of housing have to be a part of that. Again, the array that I mentioned before, the various options. And in terms of being led by, folks who are experiencing homelessness themselves, that's an important distinction that has to be accounted for. I think that for too long we have paid lip service to the idea that people who with lived experience need to be part of the solution, not only being able to work in the sector, but at the level of creating these programs and these housing developments and all of their input. We have a long way to go in the homeless service sector in terms of bringing folks who have experienced houselessness into these discussions. But I will say at Union Station that is a huge part of what we do. Like James said, I just got promoted and I'm someone with lived experience, and I'm now at an executive level. We have something called the Lived Expertise Advisory Panel at Union Station, which is made up of folks who are currently and formerly homeless. And the idea is that folks who have experienced these issues have to be brought into the conversation and exist at every level within the solutions and the organizations that provide them.
Absolutely. Once again, congratulations on your promotion, Sean.
Thank you.
Kay, does cost of the van include 1 or 2 or even 3 staff? I'll answer that real quick because Ben already answered it. The cost of the 1.2 to 1.5 actually covers 11 to 12 staff.
And two on at any given time.
and 2 on at any given time. Thank you, Ben. Robert Grant, doesn't the Hope team do the same thing that Cahoots does?
Yeah, so I can answer that question. So, I don't want to speak negatively about the Hope team. I don't want to, trash anything like that. I just want to draw some points of how the Cahoots model for mobile crisis, is where it parts ways with what's called the co-response model. So the Hope team is what we would refer to as the co-response model. It was pioneered in Tennessee, and it currently is utilized in about 2,200 cities around the country. So it's by far the most common type of mobile crisis response in cities. And what it does, for anyone who's not familiar with it, is it pairs a licensed clinician of some kind, an LCSW, an LMFT, a doctor of psychology, something like that, with a police officer. And so there are some very distinct differences between what their model does and what ours does. First and foremost, they are law enforcement based, which we are not. That's just kind of the most obvious difference. Second, we have a medical component. So we have EMTs on the van at all times. Those EMTs are capable of doing a sort of a wide range of services, from basic medical evaluations to wound care, to just regular sort of assessments and interventions for overdoses and other types of issues. They also help us rule out physical health issues that might present themselves as mental health issues. So, for example, somebody with a urinary tract infection can behave, especially if they're elderly, they can often behave as though they're psychotic or having some kind of manic episode. They can often behave very erratically. Our EMTs allow us to rule out infection when we're doing those types of situations, and so we are quite a bit different than their team. And then because we don't rely on licensed clinicians, and because we work in a sort of different style, we are quite a bit cheaper. So I don't actually know what the budget is for the Hope team, but I do know what it costs for a single police officer on the Pasadena Police Department, which is right between about $170,000 and $200,000 a year. And then the licensed clinicians that they use in the county level for the co-response teams with the sheriffs and other police departments in the area, every licensed clinician costs about $190,000 a year. So when you add up all those together, you're getting between about 1.4 and $1.7 million for, by my estimates, for something like the Hope team. And so the cost difference is just there. The other thing about that is it's very, very difficult. People get their licenses to do things like be an LCSW or whatnot. It's a very long and difficult process. You got to get your bachelor's degree, your master's degree, and then you got to do years of service to get your license. It's pretty hard to get people who do that to work Saturday night at 2 a.m. driving around town, waking up people who are sleeping on the street, just to be frank. It's pretty tough to get them to do that. And if you do want to have them do that, you got to pay them really, pretty high. And so our model, we call it a paraclinical model, which is to say it's very similar to the paramedicine model. We don't send out doctors or licensed, doctors to every single call that is some kind of physical health issue. We send out paramedics who can say, yeah, you're sick, you should see a doctor, or yeah, you're probably okay, you can stay here. And so similarly, the Cahoots model is, we send out somebody who's not a licensed clinician, but somebody who can say, yeah, you probably should see a licensed clinician, or somebody who can say, no, you're probably doing okay, we'll leave you here. So that's really the big difference between the two models.
And I would just add one more, and Robert, thank you for that question. I would add one more element to that. And, the Hope team, as I understand it, has to rotate out every 2 years or so. And that's no fault of their own. That's just the way that is set up. And as we know, these are highly relational models. If a lot of you probably remember Bill Shipman, who worked on the Hope team for many, many years. And because he was kind of an anomaly, he was on that team for years and years and years. And he really built and created community and relationships with people. And that's the difference when you have a team that has to rotate out every 2 years, and then there's a new person on there. It's a new face. You have to begin the relationship building process all over again. As we know, some of these relationships, do take years to build, depending on the complexity of the people that you're working with.
Great, thank you, Sean. We're going to take a few more questions, and then I'm going to turn it to Flo, which is going to turn it back to James. So just a few more questions. How many malpractice suits does Cahoots have a year? And that's from Robert Grant.
Zero. I also would like to respond to that. What do we respond to violent homeless individuals? And I guess one of the key points of that is, and we can decide, how people can say what they feel about this, but the Cahoots team really does, in Eugene Springfield, they perceive violence as the work of the police. That people who are being violent, which is to say physically harming other people, or physically threatening other people, that is a police related issue. Now, routinely, we show up on calls and people become violent. Most of the time, and I need to be this really clear, Cahoots members are de-escalation experts. Okay, I mean, the people in Cahoots are super skilled, and if you are not super skilled at de-escalating people who are being aggressive or over the top or angry or whatever, you will not pass your training with Cahoots. You just won't. And so routinely people do become aggressive, hostile, or whatnot with us, and we use our body language, tone of voice, and our and just our de-escalation skills at getting people to calm down. And very, very infrequently, about maybe once every other week or so, we had, of the over 20,000 calls that we handled in 2019, only 24 of those resulted with the police responding to our location, lights and sirens. And of those 24, I can't even say if any of those involved the Cahoots team being threatened. It just means that there was something that needed more help. And they requested assistance. So yeah, we have a very, very good track record of managing aggression, violence, hostility.
Great, Ben. Thank you. In just a few sentences, Ben, could you expound more on the origin of the model of Cahoots? For an example, if it is rooted in social justice or community care.
I mean, the Whitebird is a place that's rooted in social justice and community care, absolutely. And I think that a lot of people who work on the Cahoots team really have the perspective that they are doing it for the sake of the well-being of people, and just trying to create that kind of a social justice environment, creating a very compassionate response to people experiencing crises, which is just is sort of a rarity. And again, like I said earlier, it's not that a police officer can't respond with compassion, and it's not that a Cahoots worker always responds with compassion, but the systems themselves, they have a sort of when a police officer shows up, it can be very overwhelming for a person. And that is really no fault of the specific police officer themselves. It's just sort of the experience that people have, because police, like I said earlier, are involved in violence work. And so a lot of connotations are brought up for a lot of different folks. And I think we all know that when the police show up. Cahoots is just a different type of response. When they show up, you know right away that they're there not to coerce you to do anything, force you to do anything. They're only there to support you, which elicits a different type of response in people.
Hey, Brandon, can I just jump in really quick? Because I did want to answer, I think I misspoke to David's question earlier when I talked about the 4 projects in Pasadena. Those 4 projects house about 300 people all told, and we're currently building several more in Pasadena that promise to house several more 100 folks. So yeah, again, there's still never enough housing, but I think Pasadena is doing a pretty good job, especially when you look at what's happening in the San Gabriel Valley, which is, has been it's changing now, but for a long time, it's been a desert.
Thank you, Sean. And while you're at it, given COVID, what can we do to help / volunteer at Union Station?
Yeah, if you do log on to unionstationhs.org, we have a volunteer page. We also have a kind of a needs list. So there's a bunch of information on there. You can also find me on there. I will put my email in the chat too. So if people want to get a hold of me, they can do that.
Great. Thank you so much, Sean. Flo, I'm going to turn it over to you. And then you can turn it to James.
Okay. One of the reasons of us, Pasadena is Organizing for Progress and NAACP during these series is we wanted to come to the epicenters of our community. And Central Park, like you say, as I told Sean, there's a lot of, homeless people and they're in plain sight, and if you're walking down, Old Town or whatever, there's times where the police have to come and clear the homeless people up, probably because of the businesses and stuff like that. But when you hit Central Park and Memorial Park, there's so many different things. There's homelessness, there's, like you say, there's drugs, there's even, I feel sometimes, I don't want to say sex trafficking, but it feels like that sometimes going on. And just in that area alone, as also being such a touristy, even in COVID, just a place where there's, a lot of people sometimes and I know there's a substation at Central Park, right? A small police substation, right opposite Central Park. So how do you feel, do you feel there's a tension in the homelessness having to be like swept to the side? So, Old Town looks good, the parks look good, or do you feel that that there isn't a tension, that they just have to respond to what is exactly happening? Do you know what I'm saying? But, because at Memorial Park, there's people that live all around Memorial Park. Central Park is a little bit different. So that's my question.
Yeah, I think this might be the answer, and tell me if I'm hitting it, Florence. Homelessness is messy. It's messy when you have to live outside. People don't like looking at that, right? We don't like that.
Right.
And I think, the police have now been charged with really addressing things that are not crimes. And that, that's tough when you have to respond to calls, but you're responding to something that you then can't do anything with. I mean, the police, their hands are tied with regard to this. And I think that's when a cahoots type model really comes into play, because I've heard Ben Adam refer to it as mission creep, this idea that over the course of years and years, things keep getting added to the plate of social service agencies, police departments, that are probably outside the scope of what they were actually intended to do. But because there's no one else doing it, the police are left to try to address all of this and solve it. Abide by the law, because you can't arrest people who aren't breaking the law, and also try to make the community happy. The fact of the matter is, it's not illegal to be homeless. But it is really messy. I mean, imagine trying to do your business, trying to do everything that you need to do just to take care of yourself in plain view of, the entire community.
Having the foresight to convene this community dialogue. And Sean and Ben, thank you so much for the work that you do. Brandon, thank you for manning the questions and the chat. And, one of the things I would hope that law enforcement takes away from this, because Ben said it relatively nicely, and Robert triggered, and I'll go ahead and just call it what it is. To a hammer, everything appears as a nail. And so when we send law enforcement into these spaces, they're faced sometimes with situations where they only are trained to respond in a certain way. And that way is force and, as Ben articulated, violence. They are violence workers. That's what we pay them to do. So we need to, for our community, find different ways, better ways to interact with those in our population that, they're not necessarily committing a crime, they haven't committed a crime, it's just circumstances of life. And what we don't want is to lose any more lives or have trauma inflicted upon a community, because it's not just the person who is the victim directly of the violence by law enforcement, it's also the community around who has to witness it and see it. So we're going to continue these conversations next week, same time, 7 p.m. We'll be talking with stakeholders and community members around the Villa Park area. Then the following week, we will look at issues around Jackie Robinson. We appreciate the comments that you guys, and the question that you have. I think they're something that we can take away from. We can eat the meat and throw away the bone, so to speak, and really find some tangible solutions to take back to our leadership. Thank the POP, CCOP, NAACP, the Community Clergy Coalition, and I think I got everybody. But thank you all for joining us, and again, spending some time with us on this Wednesday evening. It's supposed to rain tomorrow. Be careful, wear a mask, and we'll see you next week.